So I will let them all give more detailed introductions, but just off the bat, I wanted to thank the folks from the census for coming. Obviously, they have a trove of data, and as data journalists, we are very interested in it. Jewel Jordan and Leslie Renee Malone are joining us as public affairs specialists. So they'll give us a nice intro into the Census Bureau and what it can offer reporters. Rachel Marks and Nicholas A. Jones specialize in racial statistics and research, and they are from the population division. And then Tyson Weister is a program analyst for the Center of Enterprise Dissemination, and he'll take us through some things in greater detail as well. So thank you all, and I will hand over to Jewel and Leslie. Thank you.
Thank you again to Anne for the quick introduction. As she mentioned, we are with the Public Information Office. Leslie and I are public affairs specialists, so we'll be the people that you'll reach out to if you ever have questions or have data needs. Leslie, if you can go to the next slide. So for the quick agenda, what we're going to cover today, we're going to give you guys a high-level introduction to the Census Bureau and our data. We're going to go over data equity, we'll cover racial and ethnicity statistics, and then we'll give you a demonstration of data.census.gov, which is our primary data pulling tool. And there will be question and answer sessions spread throughout these presentations, so you will have a chance to ask us about anything that comes to mind when it comes to the Census Bureau and our data. So I will be giving you the Census 101 intro. And again, my name is Jewel Jordan. I'm a public affairs specialist at the Census Bureau. So to give you guys a high level overview, the Census Bureau has one primary mission, and that's to make sure that we're counting to measure America's people and economy. Every 10 years or so, we do the Decennial Census, and that's going to be on years ending in 0. 2020 was the most recent. Our mission during the Decennial Census is going to be to count every person living in the U.S. once, only once, and in the right place. It's really important to us, and it helps to make sure that we disseminate over $600 billion annually in between Decennial Census years. Between decennial census years, we are also making sure that we are producing annual demographic statistics, and that comes from the American Community Survey, the Current Population Survey, our population estimates, and over 100 plus other surveys and programs. We also help to collect and disseminate economic data through monthly and annual surveys, as well as the Economic Census that happens every 5 years. The Public Information Office, we are the primary hub for information coming out of the Census Bureau and your contacts to get information. You can find information on our newsroom on census.gov, and the URL is there for your convenience. If you ever have questions about our data or you would like to conduct an interview, or need help just getting some information and understanding, the best way to reach us is by email. Call us at 301-763-3030 or at 877-861-2010. Our phone lines are open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. If you can't reach us on that line, you can leave a message and somebody will get back to you within the next 8 to 10 hours or so. We're pretty quick about getting back to you. Within the newsroom, you will find several different things. The primary things that you would want to use as a data journalist would be going through our news releases and media advisories, and you'll find those under the press releases. There are also going to be press kits. Press kits are going to be really helpful to you because they're going to pull together all of the information that's relevant to a specific topic. So we produce press kits for conferences to collect information for our researchers. We also produce press kits with some of our largest annual data releases, and I'll go over some of those a little bit later in the presentation. You'll also find our biweekly tip sheets. Those are going to be combinations of blurbs about different data releases that are upcoming, that have been recently released, that can help you for planning purposes. On occasion, you'll also find embargoed news releases within the newsroom. If ever there's going to be an embargoed news release, we do send out messaging ahead of time to let you know that that's coming up. There's also going to be links to blogs in the newsroom, and you can also subscribe to email notifications. We do suggest that you subscribe to email notifications to keep abreast of any upcoming news releases and for reminders about things that you might be interested in but kind of forgot about. Also on census.gov, you will find America Counts, stories behind the numbers. Just like you guys are data journalists, the Census Bureau likes to think that we have a bit of a journalistic side to ourselves as well. So we've taken interesting data points and crafted these stories that tell a little bit more than what a data release or what a blog might tell. The stories behind the numbers are going to give you some more interesting insight and might even help you with a story angle to find something out that you might want to use in the future. We do suggest that you take a look at America Counts. Excuse me. America Counts is going to be a very interesting data hub for you, and again, tell those stories in a different way that might get a little bit more into the, not necessarily the causation of something, but it'll tell more of the story behind the data that you're seeing. So I mentioned earlier that the 2020 census was the most recent decennial census. Since the census has wrapped up, we have produced several data points that you might find interesting to use. We released the apportionment numbers from 2020 back in April, on April 26th. And then we also released the redistricting numbers on August 12th. Those are available in our data.census.gov platform that Tyson's going to give you a demo of a little bit later. Pardon me. But within those, you can find some high-level information from the 2020 census. There's about 6 tables there that covers the basics of the population 18 and over. There's some race data there, and there's some a little bit of housing data there. So you might want to take a look at those and take a look through those 6 tables, and you can get them down to lower levels of geography, not just at the national or state level. Within the 2020 census data that has been released already, you can make comparisons going back to 2010, but you can also make comparisons to other decennial censuses. So long as the table is the same, you can make those comparisons. So I mentioned the American Community Survey. The American Community Survey is one of our largest household surveys that's done annually. It's an ongoing monthly survey that's sent out to about 3.5 million addresses per year. It produces some of the most timely data that we have for small areas and for population groups that were previously collected on the decennial census. The data for the American Community Survey actually goes back to 2005. So if you might have been aware of the census prior to 2005, like the 2000, you would have known that there was a short form and a long form. We did away with that and created the ACS. And the ACS has been going on for since 2005, so you have a lot of years to make past comparisons to. The ACS covers over 35 different topics, including employment, occupation, veteran status, commuting status, and supports over 300 known federal government uses. We do release these data twice a year. Once twice in the fall, once in September and once in December in most years. In September, we released the 1-year estimates. 1-year estimates are going to be available for all places that have populations of 65,000 people or more. So that's going to be at the national, state, and most counties. And then we released the 5-year estimates, and the 5-year estimates are going to get down to the smallest levels of geography, including block groups. In a normal year, like I said, we mentioned that we released those in September and September and December. The 2020 estimates, though, because were impacted by the pandemic, so there were some changes made. We do have statements that are up on census.gov, and there are press kits available for resources. But if you'll take a look over at the key dates, you'll notice that we released the 2020 ACS Experimental Estimates back in November of last year. And the experimental estimates can be used for stories, but there are caveats, and we do suggest that you read the changes in methodology and the related source material for those. We are planning to release the 2020 5-year estimates meaning coverage of 2016 to 2020 in March of this year. And then we'll go back to a regular release schedule in September and December of this year for the 1-year and 5-year estimates. The current population survey is one of the oldest household surveys. It is also one of our largest, and it goes out to households across the country. We also do 2 releases of data from the current population survey a year. Typically, we'll release the income, poverty, and health insurance estimates at the national level in September. And then in November, we release the families and living arrangements estimates that are also typically available at the national level. The current population survey, or the CPS, is the primary source of monthly labor statistics and monthly demographic statistics on over 30 plus topics. So it's a fairly timely survey, and it allows you to look at some interesting data points like educational attainment, income, poverty, and health insurance moving. But it should be known that the current population survey is primarily only going to be available at the national level. Sometimes there is state level depending on what the topic is, but typically it's going to be national only. Then we have the population estimates. The population estimates are a little bit different from the American Community Survey and this current population survey in that POP estimates are not actually survey estimates. They are derived from administrative records. So where you'll see margins of error within the ACS and the CPS, you won't see those within the POP estimates. The POP estimates do produce the most up-to-date population numbers between decennial censuses, and we release them several times a year. We are going to be releasing 2021 estimates on a regular release schedule this year, beginning in March. And they produce estimates at the national, state, and county and place level for different kinds of things. So typically we release the county and metro area, cities and town, national and state a couple of times a year. And then in June, we produce demographic estimates for the nation, state, and for counties. So those are going to give you more of the age, sex, race characteristics, and then rather than what you'll find in the other levels of geography. There's also a release of housing unit totals, and those are going to be available at the national and state level, and those are typically released in May. Then we have 2 new surveys that have started because of the pandemic. We have the Small Business Pulse Survey and the Household Pulse Survey. The Small Business Pulse Survey provides detailed info on the challenges that small businesses may be facing during the COVID-19 pandemic, and as well as their participation in federal programs such as the Paycheck Protection Program. These data are available by sector and state for the 50 most populous metros statistical areas, and we have a couple of different phases that are currently available, and the data are available on a weekly basis. The Household Pulse Survey measures the impact of the pandemic on the population. It asks a various number of questions that cover a wide range of topics such as the child tax credit, sexual orientation and gender identity, COVID-19 vaccination status, transportation, and other things that have been affected by the ongoing crisis. These data, unlike the Small Business Pulse Survey, are going to be available on a monthly basis. And we also have several phases of data going back to April of 2020. Then we have economic programs. The Census Bureau produces economic data across the entire economy on a monthly, quarterly, yearly, and 5-year basis. Our economic indicators typically will release data monthly, and those are going to be very high level. Indicators tend to not be super detailed, or they're not available at multiple levels of geography. They're typically only going to be available at the national level, sometimes at the state level. Then we have our annual business survey and other annual economic surveys that are going to be released yearly. Those tend to get a little bit more detailed, and those might go down to the metropolitan level or the county level. And then there's the Economic Census, which is going to be the most detailed and at the lowest levels of geography, though it does not get to the same levels of geography that the American Community Survey or the Decennial Census get down to. But we do have a bunch of different surveys that cover many different topics. And if you're ever interested in economic survey information, please feel free to reach out to us. All right, and now I will hand it over to Leslie to cover the data equity portion of the presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leslie Malone. I work with Jewel as the Public Affairs Specialist in the Public Information Office. And I just want to take a few minutes to discuss data equity with you. So the Census Bureau's surveys and programs have long measured equity gaps across demographic groups. Publicly available data and tools can help identify vulnerable and underserved communities. And the Census Bureau is committed to raising awareness about data, tools, and resources available to help federal, state, and local governments and community groups identify underserved communities and to equitably distribute resources. So the U.S. Census Bureau provides comprehensive data about the nation's people and economy. A key aspect of data equity is ensuring that our data are an accurate reflection or a portrait of the nation. We continuously assess how we can improve our statistical programs to better serve and represent underserved groups. And so we do that through a variety of ways: demographic data, data tools, public assistant program metrics, diversity measurement, and data education. As for our data equity tools, we actually have several tools that we pull together. So our community resilience estimates for equity, excuse me, provide an easily understood metric for how at risk every neighborhood in the US is to impacts of disaster, including COVID-19 pandemic. The Response Outreach Area Mapper, or ROAM, is an application to make it easier to identify hard to survey areas and to provide a socioeconomic and demographic characteristic profile of these areas using ACS, or American Community Survey estimates. The Opportunity Atlas is a comprehensive census tract level data set of children's outcomes in adulthood using data covering nearly the entire US population. The Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics, also known as the LEHD program, produces public use information combining federal, state, and Census Bureau data on employers and employees. Jewel reviewed the household pulse survey. And we also have the Income and Poverty Data Tool, which is an interactive application that can be used for exploring data from our Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates program. And we're big on press kits and PIO, so we also have a data equity press kit where you can find a variety of resources, including data, links to tools and visualizations, relevant America Count stories. We have a great director's blog, and of course, reports and other publications. And with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Rachel Marks, who is going to present on race and ethnicity statistics. Bear with me one moment.
Okay, thank you, Jewel. Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel Marks, and I am the branch chief of the Census Bureau's Racial Statistics branch in our population division. We're really happy to talk with all of you today about the statistics from the 2020 Census on Race and Ethnicity and the measures of diversity that we developed to communicate the results for our nation and the communities across the country.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicholas Jones. I'm a colleague of Rachel's, and I'm the Director of Race, Ethnicity Research and Outreach in our Population Division. The 2020 Census redistricting data that we're going to share today provides a new snapshot of the racial and ethnic composition of the country as a result of the improvements that we made in the design of the questions on race and ethnicity, and also the improvements we made to our data processing and the ways that we code what people are telling us about their identities. So we're really happy to talk with you all about the incredible work we undertook over the last decade to dig into these data and the tools that we have available and that we created for you as journalists to understand the data for yourselves. So we're looking forward to the discussion with you and presenting some great information about 2020, but also very much the questions that you have and to help you understand the data that we present. So I'll turn it back over to Rachel to cover the first half of the presentation, and then I'll be back with you in a few minutes for the second part.
Great, thanks, Nicholas. So the 2020 census data provide a new snapshot of the racial and ethnic composition and the racial and ethnic diversity of our nation. So to help congressional and state officials, researchers, the media, and the public examine the redistricting statistics for the nation, the states, the counties across the country, we've released 2 America Counts stories. They're shown here, and Leslie and Jewel kind of alluded to these. And together, these stories provide a new snapshot of our nation's population and how interconnected that we are. While the Census Bureau successfully tested and recommended a combined race and ethnicity question design for the 2020 census, it's important to know that we follow the 1997 standards set by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget and must use 2 separate questions to collect data on race and ethnicity. Our research over the past decade, however, did show that we could make improvement to the 2020 census race and ethnicity questions within the 1997 OMB guidelines. Within the context of the United States Decennial Census, the questions and concepts of race and ethnicity follow the standards set forth by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. The OMB minimum categories for data on race and ethnicity for federal statistics, program administrative reporting, and civil rights compliance reporting are defined as follows. OMB requires 2 minimum categories for data on ethnicity, Hispanic or Latino, and not Hispanic or Latino. And OMB requires 5 minimum categories for race, American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white, and people may report multiple races. The Census Bureau also is required by Congress to use the category some other race. You can see here the 2020 census questions again on this slide. And the race and ethnicity question format designs for the 2020 census adhere to the 1997 OMB race and ethnicity standards that I just discussed. While a separate Middle Eastern or North African or MENA response category was not included, detailed MENA responses were elicited, collected, and coded in the 2020 census. Per the 1997 OMB standards, MENA responses are classified as part of the white racial category. While the Census Bureau successfully tested an alternative combined race and ethnicity question design in 2015, we did not use a combined question format for collecting race and ethnicity, as the OMB standards require the use of 2 separate questions on race and ethnicity for self-response. Our testing this decade did, however, show that we can make some improvements within these OMB guidelines. Overall, several significant changes were made to the 2020 census questions on race and ethnicity, and I'll go through them in the next few slides. The 2020 Census Hispanic Origin question included the same 3 detailed checkboxes that were included in the 2010 census of Mexican, Mexican-American, Chicano, Puerto Rican, and Cuban, along with a yes and other Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin checkbox. There were 2 changes to the 2020 Census Hispanic Origin question. First, the instruction to print origin for example was revised to print for example. In our research, we found that this revised instruction allowed respondents to understand what the question was asking them to report, and it didn't limit their write-in response by confusing the instructions with terms like origin, which mean different things to different people. And second, the example groups were updated from Salvadoran, Dominican, Colombian, Guatemalan, Spaniard, Ecuadorian, etc., in order to represent the largest Hispanic origin population groups and represent the geographic diversity of the Hispanic or Latino category as defined by OMB standards. We also made several design improvements to the race question for the 2020 census based on our research and outreach over the past decade. First, in response to community feedback over the past decade, we added dedicated write-in response areas and examples for the white racial category and the Black or African American racial category. Second, we provided 6 example groups for each of the white, Black or African American, and American Indian or Alaska Native racial categories. These examples represent the largest population groups within each of the race categories' geographically based definitions as defined by the OMB standards. Third, based on successful previous testing, the term Negro was removed from the 2020 census by updating the category Black, African Am, or Negro to Black or African American. Fourth, we reordered the detailed Asian checkboxes and detailed Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander checkboxes by population size. Fifth, we changed the checkbox category Guamini Chamorro to Chamorro based on research and positive community feedback. And sixth, we updated the write-in instructions for the some other race category to better solicit detailed reporting. We updated the 2020 census instruction to read print race or origin to correspond with the overall question instruction to mark one or more boxes and print origins. In addition to the improvements to the question designs for 2020, we also improved the ways that we process the data and the ways that we code the responses to these questions. If you're not familiar with coding, coding is a process that we use to assign numeric codes to write-in responses to the Hispanic origin and race questions. We then use the numeric codes when we process and tabulate the data. We have a webinar and a blog in the press kit that walk through the improvements that we made for the 2020 census to the coding and processing and how these improvements impact the data. I really encourage you to explore these materials. These improvements and changes to the questionnaire, the coding, and the processing enable a more thorough and accurate depiction of how people self-identify, yielding a more accurate portrait of how people report their Hispanic origin and race within the context of a two-question format. These changes reveal that the U.S. population is much more multiracial and more racially and ethnically diverse than what we measured in the past. So next, I'm going to briefly go through the 2020 census results and how these results illuminate the racial and ethnic composition of the United States population. The first component of this composition is shown on this current slide for ethnicity statistics, which come from the question on Hispanic or Latino origin. And from these data, we know that the Hispanic or Latino population numbered 62.1 million in 2020. On this slide, we have the second component of this composition for racial statistics. These statistics come from a separate question on race. And to frame the discussion of racial composition, we use the concepts of race alone, race in combination, and race alone or in combination. Race alone means the respondent reported just one race, such as only Asian. Race in combination means that the respondent reported multiple races, such as Asian and white, or Asian and white and some other race. Race alone or in combination includes respondents who reported a single race, and it includes those respondents who reported multiple race groups. You can think of the race alone or in combination population as the maximum number of people reporting in that racial group. And these concepts have been in place since the 2000 census, and the three concepts are central to understanding our country's changing demographics. As you'll see in the results in the next few slides, it's important to look at the various race concepts for each racial group when looking at the results. On this slide, we see that the white population remains the largest race or ethnic group in the United States, with 204.3 million people identifying as white alone, and 235.4 million people identifying as white alone or in combination with another race group. Next, we see that the two or more races population, which we also refer to as the multiracial population, was measured at 33.8 million people in 2020. We also see that the sum of their race, alone or in combination population, was measured at 49.9 million people in 2020, surpassing the Black or African American alone or in combination population, which was 46.9 million people in 2020, surpassing this as the second largest race alone or in combination group. We also see that the next largest racial population groups were the Asian alone or in combination group with 24 million people, the American Indian and Alaska Native alone or in combination group with 9.7 million people, and the Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander alone or in combination group with 1.6 million people. These results are described in more detail in our America Counts story on racial and ethnic composition in the 2020 census. And these results are not surprising as they align with our expert research and corresponding findings this past decade about the impacts of question format on race and ethnicity reporting. These improvements more accurately illustrate the richness and complexity of how people identify their race and ethnicity in response to separate questions within the current OMB standards. Over the last decade, we conducted several content tests to determine the optimal question design for race and ethnicity. The 2015 National Content Test, also sometimes referred to as the 2015 NCT, was the largest race and ethnicity content test ever conducted, sampling 1.2 million housing units in the United States, including Puerto Rico. And this test explored several questionnaire designs and ways to improve the way that we measure race and ethnicity. The results of our research last decade indicated that the optimal question format for race and ethnicity was a combined question with detailed checkboxes. Employing the separate questions format in the 2020 census resulted in the reporting patterns and results in the data that we're seeing in the 2020 census, which are even more pronounced than the results in the 2015 National Content Test. This slide shows the percent distribution of race for Hispanic origin respondents by question format from the 2015 National Content Test. And the results for the separate question format, similar to what was used in the 2020 census, are represented in the blue bars. The red and green bars are results for the combined question formats. And one of the most notable findings from our research was that while the separate questions produced some other race reporting for Hispanics as high as 39%, combined question designs yielded a substantially reduced some other race population by about 0.5%. Additionally, in separate question designs, over 38% of Hispanics reported 2 or more races, compared to less than 6% of combined question designs. So these findings suggest that Hispanic respondents did not solely identify with an OMB race group. And this is critical to keep in mind as we continue to evaluate and discuss the findings for the race and Hispanic origin data. More information about the findings from the 2015 National Content Test is available on our website in our 2015 National Content Test press kit. There are multiple approaches to presenting and understanding data on race and ethnicity. And one common way to examine data on race and ethnicity is to cross-tabulate Hispanic or Latino origin by race using the statistics from redistricting table P2. In this table, the Hispanic or Latino population is shown as a distinct table row, followed by the not Hispanic or Latino population, and then a cross-tabulation of the not Hispanic or Latino population for the 6 not Hispanic race alone groups and the full set of 57 not Hispanic multiple race combinations. In a companion America Counts story that we released on August 12th, we illustrate how the 2020 census results allow us to measure the nation's racial and ethnic diversity and how it varies at different geographic levels. Next, Nicholas will walk you through the diversity measures that were developed for the 2020 census to help us understand the nation's changing racial and ethnic diversity. Nicholas?
Thanks, Rachel. Good afternoon again, everyone. So the America Counts story shown on the screen on racial and ethnic diversity highlights the multiple measures of racial and ethnic diversity that we explored with the 2020 census data. And for these measures, we cross-tabulate the race and Hispanic origin statistics, as Rachel advised, that data users often do, with the 2020 census redistricting table P2 that she showed a few moments ago. Now, in this data format, the results are not as impacted by the race reporting patterns of Hispanic or Latino respondents, as the Hispanic or Latino population is included as a category co-equal alongside the racial and ethnic racial categories. So because of this, we're confident that the changes we're seeing from 2010 to 2020 in the diversity measures, which are calculated using mutually exclusive Hispanic origin and race groups, likely reflect actual demographic changes in the population over the past 10 years, as well as improvements to the question designs and the data processing and the coding that Rachel discussed. Our measures of diversity enable us to see how all racial and ethnic groups are distributed across the country and how they inform our understanding of our diverse population. In 2020, our definitions for diversity refer to the representation and the relative size of different racial and ethnic groups within a population in a geographic area. Diversity as a measure is maximized when all groups are represented in an area and they have equal shares of the population. We're using several approaches to measure racial and ethnic diversity for the U.S. population in 2020. And on the screen from right to left, these include the Diversity Index, Prevalence Rankings, and the Diffusion Score, and a series of prevalence maps. We're going to walk through each of the measures with you today and also discuss the results to help you understand how you can use this information for your stories that you're writing. So to help set the stage with the next slide, we have a state-level map, and this uses data from the 2010 census. The map shows the geographic distribution of the diversity index across the country from state to state. The states shown in dark green were more diverse, with a diversity index score of 65% or more in 2010. States shown in light green were less diverse in 2010. The diversity index as a measure tells us the probability that two people chosen at random will be from different race and ethnicity groups. And the diversity index is bounded between 0 and 1, where a value of 0 indicates that everyone in the population has the same racial and ethnic characteristics, a homogeneous population. A value close to 1 indicates that almost everyone in the population has different racial and ethnic characteristics, so more heterogeneous. And just to make these easier to interpret, we converted the probability to a percentage by multiplying by 100. So when we go forward and we have a map showing the diversity index for 2020 census, we can see many more states that have darker green, meaning higher diversity. In 2020, at the national level, there was a 61.1% chance that two people chosen at random were from different race and ethnicity groups. Again, this is higher than 2010, when the diversity index score for the United States was 54.9%. In general, the states with the highest diversity index scores in the 2020 census are found in the West with Hawaii, California, and Nevada, in the South with Maryland and Texas, along with the District of Columbia, a state equivalent, and in the Northeast, New York and New Jersey. You can see here on the slide, Hawaii had the highest diversity index score at 76%, followed by California with 69.7%, Nevada with 68.8%. And you can see the diversity index for all states using our interactive Tableau data visualization on diversity, which we released on our website in August, and there are links to this in the presentation. Another diversity measure that we developed is a series of prevalence ranking graphics. So these prevalence ranking graphics show the percentage of the population that falls into the largest or the most prevalent racial or ethnic group. This is shown here on the slide in column 1. The second column shows the second largest group, and the third largest group, or the third most prevalent race and ethnicity population, is shown in column 3. In the graphic, the colors of the bars represent the different racial and ethnic groups shown in the legend on the left. When we see the first column, we note that the number of orange bars shows that the white, non-Hispanic population was the most prevalent racial or ethnic group for almost all states. But we also see that in addition, the Hispanic or Latino population, shown in green, was the second largest racial or ethnic group in California, comprising 39.4% of the total population. This is a change and up from 37.6% in 2010. Black or African American alone non-Hispanic, the population group shown in blue, was the most prevalent group in the District of Columbia. Asian alone non-Hispanic, shown here in red, was the most prevalent group in the state of Hawaii. And the Hispanic or Latino population, again in green, was the most prevalent group in New Mexico and also in Puerto Rico. When we go back to the measure, we can see that another part of the graphic is the diffusion score. The diffusion score measures the percentage of the population that is not in the first, second, or third largest race and ethnic groups combined. So this metric, which is shown in the far right column by the gray bars, it tells us how diverse and unconcentrated the population is relative to the three largest groups in that area. The 2020 census results show that Hawaii was the state with the highest diffusion score at 21.8%, followed by Alaska at 17.9%, Oklahoma at 17.8%, and Nevada at 16%. Finally, in somewhat of a comparison but more visual with maps, we use a series of prevalence maps to show geographic distributions and patterns in racial and ethnic diversity across the country. The first map that's displayed here on the slide shows the most prevalent race or ethnicity group by county for all counties in the United States in 2020. You can see here that the white alone non-Hispanic population, shown in orange, was the most prevalent group in about 90% of counties in the United States. The Black or African American alone non-Hispanic population, shown in blue, was the most prevalent group in some counties throughout the South. And in green, we see the Hispanic or Latino population was the most prevalent group in counties in the Southwest and the West. In addition, with this map, we can see areas of purple, which indicates the American Indian and Alaska Native alone non-Hispanic population being the most prevalent racial or ethnic group in counties in Alaska, the Four Corners region of the Southwest, and areas of the Upper Great Plains. Now, there's more variation in the map that we have next for the second most prevalent racial or ethnic group. What we see now is that more racial or ethnic groups are represented in the map, and the patterns are not as tightly clustered in specific regions. For example, the Hispanic or Latino population, again shown in green, was the second most prevalent group and spanned the entire continental U.S. with large numbers of counties in every region. The multiracial, not Hispanic population, which is shown in teal, was the second most prevalent group in many counties throughout the northern part of the country, and you can see this at the top of the map. Counties with the Black or African American alone non-Hispanic population, shown in blue, was the second most prevalent group, are mostly concentrated in the South, but we also see them in parts of the Northwest, Northeast, and Midwest. So we encourage you to use these interactive data visualization tools that we created to explore the maps and the graphics that we just showed, as they illustrate the 2020 census results, and they also connect to data from the 2010 census. For example, you can use the race and ethnicity composition data viz tool, which is shown on the left, to zoom in and see the racial and ethnic group distributions that Rachel discussed for states and counties across the country. You can use the data diversity viz tool, which is shown on the right, to zoom in and see the diversity index, prevalence rankings, and the prevalence map distributions that we just showed for every state and all counties within the country. You can also toggle back and forth between 2010 data and 2020 census data using the interactive tool buttons that are available. And both of these tools can be accessed on census.gov, and our Census Bureau colleagues produce some data gems to help you get familiar with the results and how to use the tools. They're short videos to walk you through the data visualizations. Again, these links are available on the slide and also in our 2020 Census PL press kit. So finally, we encourage you to use our America Counts stories that we presented today and link them in your writing to help people understand context for your articles. The Census America Counts stories describe in great detail the improvements that we made for the 2020 census, which, as Rachel mentioned, yield a more accurate portrait of how people self-identify in response to two separate questions on Hispanic origin and race. And our analyses of the 2020 census results show the U.S. population is much more multiracial and a more racially and ethnically diverse population than we measured in the past. The measures that we've put together for racial and ethnic diversity help inform the public discussion about diversity, and they also help us understand the complexity in the racial and ethnic composition of our country. The stories and data analysis tools that we developed are complementary to the 2020 census redistricting results and enable us to explore the richness of our nation's population in a new light. We hope you have fun exploring the data, and this concludes our formal part of the presentation. We're looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to open it up to folks before we switch gears with Tyson. Gabriel, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Gabriel. I'm with CNBC. First of all, thank you so much for everything that you all do. I could not do my job without all of the fantastic data that you put out and the way that you organize it in the tables and such. And I'm anxiously awaiting the ACS dump that's coming in March. My question for you is this. We all know that the data collection was really rough for the last 2 years. And I mean, that's one of the reasons that you guys had to delay some of the releases. I wanted to ask how you think we should be thinking about these data as they're released, knowing that you collected them during the pandemic, if that makes sense. I mean, Pulse was really helpful in understanding or getting some kind of an understanding of what was happening for small businesses and families during the pandemic. But given that we may want to be comparing some of the more current data with stuff that was collected pre-pandemic, I guess my question is, like, am I going to be able to do apples to apples? What caveats should we be thinking about in terms of presenting these data that were collected in the last 2 years?
Gabriel, thanks for your question. I was going to ask Leslie or Jewel if you have any thoughts on this, but they presented some of the other data points that are available that are more than our decennial once a decade snapshot, so they can give you more current information. Do you want to go back over some of that data, Leslie or Jewel, to just help with Gabriel's question about kind of thinking what do we know now post-pandemic versus the census, which collected all that information in the spring and summer?
Hi, Gabriel. I'll take your question since I went over the ACS portion. It's a great question, and it's one that we've gotten quite a bit. As we move forward, it should be noted that the ACS one-year estimates that are currently available, they are experimental, so they're not going to give you quite an apples to apples comparison to years prior. We don't suggest trying to make those kinds of comparisons, and there are blogs and American Count Stories that are on our website that can go into further detail about that. As far as the ACS 5-year estimates, we can't quite talk about those yet because they're not available,
Right.
but we will have additional information once they are released that kind of explains how you should look at them and whether or not you'll be able to make those kinds of comparisons. If you would like, we can also follow up with you after this training and send you the information that you're looking for to kind of explain the differences between previous one-year estimates and what we've released for 2020.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to introduce myself to you guys and meet you on a more personal basis. I use the PIO email and sometimes phone line occasionally, but yeah, I'd love to follow up. Thank you.
Absolutely, no problem. Thank you.
Joe, and please also say where you're from.
Hi, my name is Joe Snevy. I'm from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I work for a daily newspaper called the Argus Leader. This information is all great. I think it's useful, and I have a project I'd like to tackle that I think I can use this for. But I'm wondering, is this data available to be overlaid over other data? Like specifically what I'm thinking about is property valuation changes specific to South Dakota, obviously, over time, and how they compare to where people are migrating to, and how those portions of our state are changing ethnically and racially. Is that sort of, property values, that type of information available through the census somewhere, somehow?
So I'll take this one again. Excuse me. We do have some economic information. I think we have some information about it. I would need to follow up and look into it and get back to you to be 100% sure. But one of the cool tools that we have that kind of does what you're looking for is the Census Business Builder tool. And we actually have it available at the regional level, but we also have it available at lower levels, where it takes American Community Survey data as well as some economic data that we have and data from other agencies, and it integrates it all into one tool so that you can look at a specific area and see how their population compares to other businesses that are there, to see what kind of income they have, to see what kind of numbers they're producing. So we do have something that's very similar to what you're looking for, but I would need to look into it to be 100% sure whether or not we have the property valuation that you're looking for.
Okay, I'll just follow up with you guys through your PIO email, and we'll go from there.
Please do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ming Lee and then Nisa.
Hi, I'm a data and graphics reporter from Politico. Recently, actually, we have been looking at the census data and trying to figure out the migration of Black non-Hispanic residents in big US cities in the past 2 decades. So we have managed to find the population data for the Black non-Hispanic population in the Decennial Census. But when it comes to housing, the age, the income, or education levels data, it seems we can only go as far as Black alone instead of Black non-Hispanic. So I guess my question is, does the Hispanic and non-Hispanic categories also apply to data other than the population data? So for example, the ones on American Community Surveys. Thank you.
Rachel, could you talk about that one and the availability of our data tabs with A through I for ACS in terms of standard data, and then also the other data that could be cross-tabulated?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. That's a great question, and it's one we've definitely received before. As it sounds like you might be familiar with some of our race, we call them race iterations, right? And those are our standard tables. What Nicholas mentioned are A through I. So those are some of our basic tables, right? Where you might have sex by age, or vacancy status, or foreign-born population, and they're crossed by the major race groups, where A is white alone, B is the Black or African American alone, and so on. And it goes through each of the race groups alone, then the 2 or more races population, Hispanic or Latino, and then also white alone, not Hispanic. But right now at this time, we don't have in those standard products the Black or African American crossed by Hispanic or not Hispanic. But I have to go back and double check for you, because we do have other types of products where we do have those types of crosses, right? So for example, in the 2010 census, we do have those iterations where we cross, where we have the Black or African American, not Hispanic or Latino, and the Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino in our summary file 2 product. And that's where you can get characteristics for that population. I'd have to double check to see where we may or may not have that in the American Community Survey for more recent data, but I can certainly follow up and get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. I think, Ming, if you follow up with us, we can see whether or not it's part of a tab that's done not in a standard piece of the ACS, but in something like a population profile for a specific group.
Okay.
So please follow up with Jewel or Leslie about that.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nisa from Michigan Radio, and thank you so much for your presentation. And my question for you was that we have a really large Arab community in Michigan, and I know that MENA is categorized as white in the census. I was wondering if you had any suggestions on data for any Arab communities in the American Community Survey, or even the census, about I guess about those who identify as MENA.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We know that there is a huge interest in data on the MENA population. And so right now, we don't have any specific MENA data from the race question currently available. But if they want data right now, what I would direct them is to data from the American Community Survey on the ancestry question. And we have a number of Middle Eastern and North African groups where we have population counts, and we also have those data crossed by characteristics in our special population tables as well, if they meet certain thresholds. So for example, we have Lebanese, Egyptian, Chaldean, and many others available there. But looking forward to the 2020 census, what we're planning to do, because we collected all of those detailed write-in responses for the white and Black groups for the very first time, we're very excited about this. We're planning to have pop counts and some characteristics for Middle Eastern and North African groups for the very first time from the Decennial Census. So definitely be on the lookout for more information on that coming soon.
Thank you. Do you know when that might be? I'm so sorry.
No, go for it.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a great question. Right at this time, we're still developing those data products and undergoing, research and development. So we don't have a timeline right now. We do have a dedicated website about our 2020 census data products, and that's where all of the information will be posted about the products. And so as soon as we have more information about timelines and release dates, that information will be shared there.
Okay, Nick, go ahead, and then I think we'll move on to Tyson.
Okay, yeah, I had a quick question. I noticed during the pandemic that a lot of health departments across the country, and even our own readers, were requesting COVID-19 case and death rates by zip code. And obviously the census has the ZCTAs, which is the zip code tabulation areas, which are essentially the same. And I think we ended up using the census crosswalk for that. Obviously there aren't perfect matchups, and there's a lot of problems with zip codes for data visualization. So I guess my question is, how are ZCTAs and zip codes different? And does the census have a recommendation for sort of small area data analysis that isn't zip codes, that a normal person would be able to say, yeah, I know what that is, I can understand that?
Nick, thanks for your question. I'm not sure if this is something that we could pivot to for Tyson to address, but if not, we certainly could get a geography specialist to get back to you and give you more details about how to make those comparisons. But I'm not familiar enough to give you an educated answer on that.
No, you're fine. I knew we didn't really touch on it here, but I was curious because that was something that I was looking at.
Yeah, great question.
It is a great question. I was going to pair it what Nick was saying, so we can follow up with you and try and get you on the phone with a geography specialist to kind of go over that and maybe give you some recommendations for how you can proceed.
Okay, Tyson, would you like to begin?
Sure, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thank you all so much for having us here. My name's Tyson, and my area of expertise is on data.census.gov. So if you've used our site in the past, or if you're brand new, either way, that's going to be okay. We just pushed out a lot of updates last month. So the core functionality is going to be the same if you've been using the site previously. There's just going to be a few clicks and parts of the site that look differently. So this will be something that's going to be useful for you, kind of no matter what your skill level is with data.census.gov. We are on our site the primary way that you access census data. And what we have are data from the most popular surveys and programs. Right now, that's the Decennial Census data from 2000 through the present. We have a few tables from the Population Estimates program on the site today. We are working on onboarding that program, so you'll look to get additional tables loaded from that survey or that program in the future. We have American Community Survey data from 2010 through 2019. And then we're not going to cover this today, but we do have some economic data on our site as well from the Economic Census and surveys like County Business Patterns and other surveys and programs. Those are on our site from 2012 through the present. So that's kind of the high level overview as to what can I get. I know Jewel talked about these surveys in detail earlier, and we have most of that data on our site. If you want the detailed lists, you can visit the link here at the bottom. With that, what I wanted to showcase today is really how you can go about getting started with the site. So I wanted to walk through 2 to 3 examples, time allowing, showing different ways you can go about searching on the site and tips and tricks to help you along. So with that, we're going to jump right in to our first example on how to get started with census data. And for this example, what I want to show you is just how you can use the single search bar on our site and how you could get a high-level overview of data from across the Census Bureau all in one place. The great thing about census data is we have so many different surveys, programs, topics, and we cover those small geographies, but sometimes it can feel overwhelming if you're not sure where to start. So what you'll want to do is visit data.census.gov. We do recommend using Google Chrome. It gives you the best speed and performance while you're on the site. And you'll notice right off the bat, there are 2 ways to get started with your search. What I'm going to showcase first is the single search bar. And what you want to use that for are your keywords, geography, topics, table IDs, years. So I'm going to put in, for this example, San Antonio City, Texas. When you're typing in the single search bar, it is making its one best guess as to what you mean. So if you're not quite getting the results you expect, maybe try tweaking those words a little bit. Anytime you are looking for a city, we do recommend putting the word city in that request. And then you'll just hit the search icon or press enter. This will take you to the all results page. And what I want to show here is the profile on the right-hand side of the page where it says San Antonio City, Texas profile, and it has a map. You can click the map or the view profile. Once you've made that click, it's going to take you to a map of San Antonio with a little bit of information at the top. And then it will load some highlighted statistics from across the Census Bureau. So these are some of the most popular pieces of information that people come to us for: total population, median income, bachelor's degree or higher. And then what you'll see as you scroll through, there are over 40 sections to this profile. And it will give you high-level information on the left, something like median age for San Antonio, Texas, compared to median age for the state. And then it will give you more detailed breakout information on the right-hand side. So this is just a really great way to explore all of the different topics at the Census Bureau at a high level that come from the different surveys and programs in our site. And you'll notice that they are sourced. So you'll see 2019 American Community Survey 1-year estimates. Some of these data will come from the Economic Census or the Decennial Census, and we've put it together for you in this nice view. As you scroll through, you can also look to the left-hand side. If you see word or phrase that's of interest to you, like income and poverty, once you click that part, it will jump you to that section of the profile. And you can see, in this example, median income. I'm going to scroll down to the poverty just to show you here again. You can look at, in San Antonio, 16.8% of people were living in poverty based on the 2019 ACS 1-year estimates. It gives you some poverty information by age. And then it also gives you the source table that these data come from, in this case, S1701. So I'm going to click that here. These are all clickable links, and it's just another great way, besides the profile itself, on how you can go about drilling into some of this data. So here in this table, I can see San Antonio, Texas is at the first column. It has a column for the total population. And as I scroll to the right, I'll see more information. So the total number of people in San Antonio below the poverty level. And then here I see the same 16.8% that we saw on the previous view in the geography profile. Another way that you can get to the information, but notice on the left-hand side, as I kind of scroll down through this table, I can see poverty for different age groups, by male and female, by different race groups, and by Hispanic origin, educational attainment. That's just with a couple of clicks that I was able to get here to not only the high-level poverty data, but also some of the more detailed ways that you can slice and dice poverty. So definitely recommend geography profiles as a great way to start on our site. Also know that you'll want to access data from the 2020 census. So I want to showcase how you can pull up some of those tables quickly, as well as how you can specify your geographies through the advanced search. So I mentioned when you use the single search bar, it makes its one best guess as to what you mean. The advanced search allows you to more precisely select your geographies and also allows you to access the full set of detailed search criteria. So for this example, we're going to pull up data from the 2020 census, and we'll look at the Hispanic population counts for Michigan, Wayne County, and Detroit City. And these are going to come from one of the tables that Rachel had mentioned earlier for Hispanic on table P2. So going back to the site here, anytime you want to start fresh, you'll just click the U.S. Census logo in the upper left. It'll clear everything out and take you to the landing page. And then what I'm going to do from here is click advanced search. So even though it says advanced, it doesn't mean it's just for advanced users. It's just your option to access these filters, and certainly helpful in a variety of cases. On the left-hand side where it says find a filter, you'll see these different categories, and you'll want to start out with whatever you think is most important. I like to start with geography. And once you click geography on the left, if you've used our site before, you'll notice some changes. We've pulled out the 9 most commonly used geographies here at the top. And then you get an alphabetized list of all other geographies below. So this just helps you draw attention to the geographies that most of our data users want and need. And we're going to actually work through a few of these. So we wanted Michigan to start. So I see a box for state. We'll go ahead and click that. And as we're working through the filters, we're always looking for a checkbox as a final selection. So I get a list of all of the states. I mark the checkbox for Michigan. And then in the upper left of our screen, we see Michigan under one filter. So we've made that selection. One way that you can go back to select additional geographies is to click geography on the left. And this just takes us back to that very first geography view when we clicked it the first time. So from here, we can continue to select additional geographies. I'll choose county. In this case, we see a folder for each of the states. A folder means once you click the folder, you'll get more detailed options to choose from. So here I'll click Michigan. And then it gives me the option to select a county in Michigan. I'm going to look for the checkbox here for Wayne County, Michigan. Mark the checkbox. It's in the upper left as a selected filter. If you've been using the site before, one thing you'll want to notice is it's only showing us one view in the panel at a time. And then that's just to simplify the amount of information you see on screen. And up at the top is where you see, hey, I clicked on the left geography, then I chose county, Michigan, and then I'm getting this list here that I see on screen. So if you're ever looking for direction on how you got to where you were, they are in the breadcrumbs at the top. Another helpful option for you in the breadcrumbs is that arrow on the left, and that allows you to navigate backwards. Each time you click the arrow, it takes you back one click. So I'm going to click it 2 times. It takes me back to the geography page to start. And the last thing we wanted to select for geography was the city here at the Census Bureau. We categorize cities as places. Sometimes they are known as county subdivisions if you're looking for towns or townships in the Northeast or Midwest, but we are going to select the place level to start. We'll choose Michigan, and then we'll get a list of all of the places in Michigan. So we'll just scroll through this list and we're looking for Detroit City, Michigan. Check the box. On the left, we can see we have our 3 geographies. So now we want to specify, hey, we want data for the 2020 census and we want it to be for Hispanic or Latino. You can use the filters on the left-hand side as one option to enter that search criteria. So I'm going to click here on years on the left-hand side to start. And I see checkboxes. I'll mark the checkbox for 2020. See, it's been added to the left as a filter. Now I'm going to click here on surveys. It gives us a list of all of the surveys that we have on our site, and then it condenses that list to just the surveys that are compatible with the search criteria that we've selected already. In this case, because we limited the year to 2020, it's only giving us the options that actually have 2020 data. And then I'll click Decennial Census folder. And then we just see that one checkbox for redistricting data, Public Law 94-171, and I'll mark that checkbox. Again, this is an improvement over the site previous version where you would have got the entire list of Decennial Census products and we would have grayed out the ones that weren't compatible with your selections, and you would have had to scroll through a long list in order to get to this particular data set. Last thing I'm going to do, certainly an optional step, there's only 6 tables currently that are part of this redistricting data set from the 2020 census. If you wanted to specify a topic, however, you certainly could do that to get just those tables that are compatible for Hispanic or Latino. So I'm going to click topics on the left. Again, it's going to show us the full set of topics. It's going to condense it to just the topics for 2020. And I just want to point this out because if you're ever working through the site and you're seeing something, or working through these filters and you're not seeing a filter category that you expect to see, be very mindful of what you've already selected or what you've typed into the single search bar, and make sure that there's nothing that would be incompatible with what you're trying to select. So I'm going to choose race and ethnicity. Then I'm going to choose the folder for Hispanic or Latino. And again, we're always looking for a checkbox as a final selection. So I mark that checkbox. You can view your filters on the left-hand side. There are 6 that I have. Once you're happy, 3 geographies, 2020, redistricting data, and Hispanic or Latino, what you'll want to do is just click search in the lower right. And then I like to look at the tables. So I'm going to go ahead and click tables at the top. And here we start to see some of the options that are available. I don't need these filters anymore on the left, so I'm going to click the chevrons at the top of the filters panel just to dedicate more space on my screen to look at the results. And what we can see here is the first table result is Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino by race. And the second table result is for the population 18 years and over. So I want Hispanic or Latino for the total population. I'm going to click back into table P2 and then start to look at these data. And what we can see here is each of our geographies are in the columns of the table. The first row gives me the data for total population in the state. And then the second row is specifically for the Hispanic or Latino population. So I can see these three numbers for that particular group. The not Hispanic or Latino population is underneath, as well as some of the detailed ways of looking at race for that particular group. Right, want to also just showcase very briefly an abbreviated version of how we can go about mapping on the site as well. One of the great things about Census Bureau data is you can access these data for small level geographies. So as an example, if you're looking at health insurance, we can see I pulled up a table that it was 8.7% in Ada County, Idaho. But what does that really look like within the county? Well, one way you can look at this is by choosing a geography like the census tract level, more granular information, and we offer you the option to visually digest this information directly on our site. I'm going to show you how you can go about doing that here. I have another tab open where I've already made some selections using the same steps that we just covered, right? We showed how to use these filters on the left. I went through, so I selected the geography, the tract level, and chose all census tracts in Ada County, Idaho. And then I also chose the topic for health insurance. And when I brought you to this just now, I had copied that URL and loaded it. All of your information, your searches, your tables, your maps are accessible for you to copy and paste through the URL. So now that we're done with that, I'm going to hide the filters. Anytime you want to make a map, the first thing you want to do is find a table that has the data you want to map out. So I'm looking at health insurance data, and the first table result is selected characteristics of health insurance coverage in the United States. I can see I have the first census tract here in the first column, and then it gives me that total population. The second column for the total population with health insurance. The third column for percent with health insurance. A fourth column showing the total number of people without health insurance, and then the fifth column showing in that census tract 11.6% of the population didn't have health insurance. So this is the metric that I want to map out, but I want it for all of the geographies in my selection. What you can do from here is we're clicked into the table, we've selected our geographies, and now you want to click Maps at the top. Once you click into the Maps tab, what you should be seeing is it's zooming you into your selected area. You'll want to make sure your geography boundaries is set to the census tract level, which we can see that the county is the total shape and the smaller areas are the census tract. And then the last step is really to just select the variable you want to map out. So I'm going to hide this just so we can see the map across our full screen. And the variable is classified as a dimensions. So when you click on dimensions, it's the very first button. And then you'll click on that drop-down menu. You're going to see a pattern. So there are hundreds of options from this table of what you could map out. A set of labels that begin with the word total, corresponding to the first column. Another set of labels beginning with the word insured, corresponding to the second column, and you'll find that this process repeats itself. So you'll scroll through and see that the fifth set of labels begin with percent uninsured, and then within each of these sets of labels, you'll be seeing it ordered in the same way the rows of the data table were. So we wanted fifth column, first row. It corresponds to this label here, percent uninsured civilian non-institutionalized population estimate. And then it's already updated the map. So what we can see are the areas visually with darker shades of blue have higher percent of the population without health insurance. Just another way for you to easily digest this information, not in a table format. Want to wrap up with just a couple of additional resources. One is what we did show today is the official way to access data from the Census Bureau. We are continuing to improve the site based on your feedback, and the email address to provide that feedback is provided here. And lastly, just also want to point out that we showed a very condensed version of what you can do on the site. There's certainly more detailed functionality and data that you can access. We have a dedicated resources page with some of these educational materials, short videos, full webinars, and much more. Visit the link in the upper left or click the help button on the landing page to access this information. And I think, thank you again, and we'll take questions.
Thank you, Tyson. Does anyone have any questions for Tyson or anyone else from the census?
Hi, Tyson. I'm RJ with AP in Atlanta. I was wondering if you could quickly go through in that advanced search, there was state and then county and then place, and I guess some more granular after that, like blocks or whatever. Could you show me what those are like and how I would go about finding out if I want to zoom in on a specific neighborhood or even a specific street? How would I do that?
On the advanced search with the boxes, in the middle, zip code tabulation area is generally one of the smaller types of geographies. And then the last three boxes, tract, block, and block group, are the smallest levels of geographies you can access data from the Census Bureau for. So I'll just say that on a high level. And then what I'll also note is on our maps, so just starting fresh and going over to maps, the selection map is going to be a great way for you to explore some of this information visually. So once you click on geos, it gives you all of the different types of geographies you can choose from. So if something caught your eye or you wanted to explore some of the different ones, I had mentioned tract, block group, and block, you can choose one of those. And then it just kind of zoomed us into the middle of the map, but you could manually scroll and then zoom in on an area. And as you zoom in further, what you're going to notice is that there are street lines populated and street labels. So you'll get more detail that really help give you some reference point as to what geography you might want to select. If you didn't know it numerically, but could visually identify it, this would be one way. You could click that area on the map and choose select. And from here, drill into some of the tables or add additional search criteria.
Perfect, thank you.
David, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for the great presentation. I saw you looked at people with health insurance. Is there data about people who vote, or the voter participation?
Hi, David. I'll actually take that question since you're asking about voter participation data. That actually is going to come from the current population survey, and it is available on census.gov, but that data is not going to be found in data.census.gov. But if you would like, we can, if you want to give us a call or send us an email, we can work with you on finding the latest data that we have for voter participation.
Hi, I had a question about consolidated city-county governments, looking at census data. There are a couple in Georgia. I've worked for the Ledger Enquirer in Columbus. Columbus is one, and Augusta, Richmond County on the other side of the state is the other. And when I look at Muskogee County and Columbus City data, it's exactly the same because there are no other settlements in Muskogee County that aren't a part of the consolidated city government. Should I treat the county and the city data exactly the same if it all matches up? It looks like the boundaries are the same too. I guess the larger question is, how do you treat consolidated city governments with census data?
I think that's a best question to be addressed by a geographer, Jewel, just because definitionally I'm not as familiar, but there are definitely instances where certain cities or place level geographies would have the same boundaries and the same data from any standpoint, whether it's just happens to be classified as both, or if it, in your instance, is, you know, a consolidated city. So it's definitely information that we see in our data, but I think a geographer could best address the question if you wanted to get with Jewel.
I agree. So again, if you could follow up with us either by email or by giving us a phone call, we can work with you and try and get you in contact with a geographer to answer that kind of.
Great, thank you all. I was looking at census data for 2020 and noticed the numbers were the same, and it was interesting to me.
Ming Lee?
Hi, I have a quick question. So sometimes I find it a bit difficult for me to choose between 1 year and five-year estimates. So I wonder if there's a rule of thumb of when to use 1 year and when to use a 5-year estimates.
That's a really good question. So sometimes there is a bit of a rule of thumb. It depends on what you're looking at. For 1 year estimates, they're really good for doing year-to-year comparisons, but it should also be noted that they're only going to be available for places with 65,000 people or more. And sometimes if you're looking at a very specific population, they're just not going to be able to meet that threshold. If that happens, that automatically kicks you into the ACS 5-year estimates because they're going to be available for those smaller levels of geography and those smaller populations. So that's kind of one obvious way that you can have an immediate. So even if there are 1 year estimates available within a grouping, but you're trying to make comparisons, it would then be best practice for you to switch over to using all 5-year estimates to make sure that you're making apples to apples comparisons. And even within the 5-year estimates, if you're going to do comparisons over time, you need to make sure that you're comparing non-overlapping years. So most people will do like a 10-year comparison and compare the 2005 to 2009 5-year estimates to the 2015 to 2019 estimates, for the simple fact that that's going to give you a 10-year time span of the in between of the estimates, and they're non-overlapping, so you wouldn't be counting any populations twice.
Okay, thank you.
Joe?
This isn't really a technical question, but can you talk a little bit about the level of inquiries you get from the media and sort of the backlog of requests you get and your ability to handle those? I suppose they probably peak when you release new data, but how quick of a response time, I guess, might be the best way to ask that.
Sure. So we're actually pretty responsive. We have public affairs specialists available by email all pretty much from 7 in the morning until about 5:30 in the evenings. I mentioned earlier that our phone line is open 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern time. So if you ever want to give us a call, there should be somebody available on the phone lines to take your call at that time. We're pretty quick to get back to you. I say maybe give it like a 24-hour turnaround. If you don't hear back from somebody within that time period, ping us again. But we're pretty quick and pretty responsive to get back to you, usually within a few hours.
Great, thanks.
Any final questions?
And sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And I have one more thing I wanted to add, just to go back to Ming's question. We actually do have guidance as well as when to use ACS 1 year versus 5-year estimates. There's a blog on it, and there's information in past press kits that goes into the differences between the two and then when to use which estimates. So we do have that available for you online as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to thank Leslie, Rachel, Nicholas, and Tyson for walking us through all of this today. And if we could just give them a round of applause for participating over Zoom. It was one where we had actually hoped to take you all to their offices, but alas, Omicron again got in the way. But thank you all. It was really helpful, and we appreciate it.